We continue with Negotiations That Pay with Greg Pinio.
Another situation that I run into consistently, especially on properties that I'm buying to keep for the long term, if I'm able to communicate with this particular seller that it's to their benefit to be involved in the financing, one of the components that we need to find agreement on is the entire topic of interest rate. Let's go back to the $500,000 scenario that they own this building free and clear, that they thought they wanted all cash, but what they really wanted was income stream. Well, if they had $500,000 cash for the deal, their basis has been written down to zero. They pay capital gains on that building. They may only have $350,000 left to be put in a bank account at 2 or 3%. Versus if I give them a minimum amount down, enough to cover their closing costs, let's say $20,000 down, and $480,000 on a note, I realize that $480,000 is a much larger principal amount than the after-tax $350,000 that they would have had. So first, I want to show them scenario A. If you sell it all cash, you're going to have $350,000 left at 2%, right? $7,000 a year of interest is your entire income versus $480,000 at, let's just say, 4% or 5%. Well, how do I sell 4 or 5%? That's a pretty low interest rate. It's very simple. Look at what your options are. You're telling me you want secure, stable interest income, and your idea around that is to put money in the bank. Well, here's the bank's interest rates, 1 to 3%. If I'm giving you 4 or 5%, aren't I basically doubling what you're getting? Easy to sell. Very easy to sell. So this is simply how I go about negotiating interest rate, is to show them the alternative. Now, you're going to get some very sophisticated sellers who say, well, listen, I'll take my cash and I'll invest it in something more risky, but where the potential yield is greater. And then I will simply lay out that, but what you told me is that you want to be traveling, retired, and worry-free about the income stream of your invested dollar. And then in the same breath, you're telling me that you're wanting to take this money and put it in the stock market because you think you can make 7 or 8 or 9%? How does the stock market equate to worry-free? Let's interview 100 people and let's ask them this simple question. Have you or have you not worried about your invested dollar in the stock market lately? 99 out of 100 would say they worry about it all the time. Therefore, what I heard you say about being retired and on the road and traveling and worry-free, I don't believe that that's achieving your objective. So it's not that I'm not going to challenge people, but what I'm wanting you to hear is that I'm challenging them with their own attitudes. That you're telling me what you want, and I'm going to give you a proposal that meets that structure. And if you depart from what you want, I'll challenge you on what you've already told me. That isn't what you've told me. You've said you want worry-free income stream. And now you're telling me you're considering the stock market? Explain that to me. Because I thought I listened carefully. And worry-free does not mean the stock market. Worry-free is an income stream of a secured interest rate collateralized by a building that you've known and cared for the last 25 years. That's worry-free. So these are some of the things that come up on a typical basis. And yet, again, there is no typical scenario. You're going to have to treat every one of these sellers as an adventure and let that adventure take you to the answers for that particular equation. Get involved with them, know them as people, and be confident in your knowledge and abilities, because that confidence will create a deferral on their part to go in the direction with what you're suggesting. I'm going to give you another metaphor here, and it goes back to the pilot world. That as a pilot flying hundreds of people in my career around, all shapes and sizes and with all attitudes around small airplanes, I realize that their fear level around small airplanes is directly proportional to my confidence and demeanor as the pilot in the airplane. And consequently, I'm very aware of that. And so in my speaking with them, the tone of my voice, the calmness in everything that I'm conducting, if there's a beep that's going to go off in the airplane, if I push a button, I let them know in advance. Oh, by the way, I'm going to push this button and there'll be a beep going off. It means nothing. I just wanted to let you know so that they don't think that, the left wing just fell off and that beep just reminds me of that. I'm going to just be very calm and very confident in my demeanor, consequently putting them at rest to those who are anxious about flying in small planes. And I've taken people up who have horrific fear of flying, who, when they see how matter-of-fact it is that we open a door, pull out a plane, get in it just like it's a car, and start it up and just take off, it's so simple that they like, oh, okay, I guess this is no big deal. The same thing applies, that your knowledge needs to be so fluent in all of the aspects of real estate investing that you're able to calm your seller, calm your audience to where they realize that they're in good hands and that they don't need to worry about this whole transaction or how it's going to work or how does escrow work or how does the whole process go down. And then from then on out, all they need to realize is that they're getting an income stream from you every month and that you're on time and that, of course, you'll provide them with any amount of references that they possibly could want. Interestingly, that as you present that way, 1 out of 100 will ask me for references. But of course, I let them know that they're available to anybody who needs those. Would you like my credit report? Would you like my financial statement? Would you like 100 names of people I bought buildings from that would be good references for you to talk to about how this whole process works and how I am to work with as a person? In making that offer, less than 1% of the people take me up on that. And yet, not making that offer would be to my detriment. Do you remember the Aristotelian enthymeme? It would go something like this around that particular topic. All people who offer their credit report must have good credit. Greg has offered us his credit report. Therefore, Greg has good credit. Do you see that what I've done is I've simply provided them the minor premise? Greg has offered us his credit report, and what they have done, without even knowing it, is filled in the major premise and the conclusion of that particular enthymeme. And of all the people that I've offered credit report and references and all of those things to, less than 1% have actually asked for those things. They have filled in those blanks themselves and said, well, what's the point? He wouldn't offer these things if he didn't have good credit, because only people who have good credit offer those things. So what's the point of even looking? I'm telling you, you could offer them your credit and all the references in the world, and even if you didn't have good credit, if you offered them in confidence, likely they wouldn't even ask for it. That's the power of the enthymeme, is understanding that if you do this and do it sincerely, they will fill in these blanks themselves, and the negotiations will move to the next level. You see, 466 was a good year in negotiation. Thank you, Corax. Thank you, Aristotle, Socrates, Cicero. You too can be as qualified as they were. Before we go into a few case studies, I'd like to point out that we have spent a lot of time talking about uncovering all available means of persuasion, as Aristotle would say. We're being observant. We're in their space. We're looking for the answers to 100 questions, and we're being proactive to ask a lot of questions that will lead us to attitudes and answers and goals and all of these things so that we can then start constructing our proposition and move forward in that vein. I want to take a minute, though, and talk about the awareness around what questions we may not want to ask. And without being specific on that topic, because I know that you could think of several as I can, I just want you to run each question you're about to ask to its logical benefit or end. In other words, if I ask question A, where is it going to lead to? For example, a question I may not choose to ask a seller is, oh, by the way, have you gotten an appraisal lately on the property? The reason I probably wouldn't want to ask that is because if they haven't gotten an appraisal, I've just put a seed in the ground that what might come back out of that question is, oh, no, I haven't. That's a great idea. Can you think of a couple good appraisers I might call to find out exactly what the value is of my building? Do you see, I just kind of shot myself in the foot, but I deserved it because I asked a question that led in a direction away from where I'm trying to go with this property. Another question I'm asking, are you up to speed on what current market rents are? Well, if they're not up to speed, now they're feeling like they should be up to speed. Because maybe, in fact, their building and the rents are low. I would love to buy that building at its current rents. I should say my offer based on the income stream that it currently produces. If all of a sudden they realize their rents are low, raise rents, now I'm going to pay a price based on those higher rents. So I'm not wanting to put things out there that aren't going to lead in the direction I want to go as an investor. As well, I think we need to be very sensitive to not only the real estate related questions we shouldn't ask, but the personal questions we shouldn't ask. I'll give you an example. Again, one of our young students in a small group, in his discussion with the seller on the phone, this hypothetical situation that we have orchestrated. Here's this seller who's in her late 30s. What he does know is that there are two kids there. And of course, he's thinking this is a seller of a property and he's wanting to come by and take a look at the property. Okay, all of that's reasonable and fine, but what came out of his mouth was this question. Okay, so is your husband at home right now? This is all of a sudden making the seller rather nervous because his next question is, I'd like to come by the property. Well, those two things don't go together. Husband not home and a stranger coming by the property? Those two questions in that order just shot yourself in the foot. That person shut down and shut down quickly because you've made them feel uncomfortable. A way of saying that same request would be, Anne, I'd love to come by and see your property. Is there a time when you and your husband are both at home that I might be able to come by and do that? You see, you've got the same end result happening, but in a way that is not going to offend anybody. This is the awareness piece, is that every question needs to be measured in terms of, is it getting you in the direction you're trying to go? And B, is it offensive in any way or leading you down a path that you're going to have to then backpedal yourself out of? Questioning, be it verbal or be it nonverbal, is very intentional, very focused. That's why when we are taking that phone call, we want to just go into our zone. It's showtime, no distractions, and be very cognizant of everything that's going on, very aware, so that we're asking just the right questions. We're tapping the nose of that space shuttle gently to move it in the direction we're wanting it to go, and we're, more than that, extremely aware of the main thrust of where this thing is going on its own so that we can jump on board and then just kind of nudge it in the direction from there, sensitively, intelligently, not asking questions that will harm the direction we're trying to go. As an entrepreneur, I get asked on a monthly basis, what do I believe is the greatest opportunity of our time? And I get asked this, interestingly, from a business perspective. People looking for kind of the latest angle, the latest wave, the latest rise in what idea is it that's going to flourish and produce incredible profits. The answer has always been, and is more the answer now than has ever been the issue of customer service. We spent a lot of time on another one of our CD sets talking about this entire idea around how many times is it that you've called a company and you get a voicemail system or a menu system that says, if you'd like this, press 1. If you'd like that, press 2. If you'd like this, press 3. And you press 3, and what you get is another menu system. Oh, now that you've got this, if you'd like this, press 1. If you'd like that, press 2. And we find ourselves pounding 000 on the phone just to get a human being. Well, how does that apply to the negotiation and what we're talking about now is simply this, that the idea of making this effortless and easy for your seller is your job, period. And so being aware that this is your job means anything I can do to make this process easy for you, that's what I want to do. Customer service is my awareness. So do I want to meet you where? At a place of your convenience, preferably your home. That should be so much easier for you. Any documentation, any mailing, any copying, picking you up to take you to escrow. If we need to go talk to an attorney, I'll pick you up and take you there. You won't so much as to need to think of directions on how to get to the escrow lady's office. Nothing. I handle all of it. And if we treat people that way, we will make a huge impression. And after this deal closes, it's nothing to then ask them for referrals or a letter of reference to build our business. But if we do our job right, they'll be happy to give those kind of referrals. I think that where this ties in is I see so many people asking for things when they haven't earned the right yet to ask for anything. If we can treat this like a red carpet Ritz-Carlton approach to real estate investing, we will find that our business will grow quickly and soundly. If we're playing the I'm going to give to you if you give to me game, this kind of give and take that we normally think of under the heading of negotiation, we'll come to the middle kind of thing. How about we split the difference? How about we go halfway? All of this, that makes no long-term sense. Again, we are not going to move forward with this transaction unless it works for us. But only those transactions where we can get an end result that meets the seller's 100% end expectations and goals and desires. Those are the ones we're going to sign up for. I would like to go through a couple case studies whereby the principles of negotiation applied. And I think you'll see that in every situation, my awareness of what the seller was saying, even what the seller wasn't saying, all of the issues of ethos, pathos, logos, all came into what was happening in that transaction. I'll start with a very simple phone call that I received from a property owner that owned a property adjacent to one that I already owned. And he knew I was a real estate investor. He knew I was in the real estate related business and thought I would want to know that they were going to sell their property. And his initial thought was to tell me because I may want to pick my neighbor. If I knew of somebody who would want that property, wouldn't I want to have some input on who actually would be informed of this opportunity so I would sort of pick my neighbor? Well, as it turned out, they wanted $50,000 was the price that he quoted me for this small cabin up in the mountains that was next door to a couple properties that I already owned. And of course, my discussion went from there to, well, David, why are you considering selling this? You've used this quite often in the past. And the answer was, well, we have moved up towards an entire different mountain range near an entirely different ski area. And consequently, it's likely that we're not going to be using that particular facility much. How did you arrive at the price? Well, we've just sort of looked at some properties in the area, and this is what we feel is a real fair price for that. Great. And what is your objective in selling this in terms of what you're trying to achieve by selling it? Well, again, we're not going to have a use for it, but there's some things that we'd like to do with that money that are better served than just having it sit there in equity in this house that we're not using. Of course, my next question is, well, what are those things that you're wanting to handle with this equity turned cash? Because, of course, that's what they wanted, was all cash, like many sellers do. Well, the answer to that question revealed that what they really wanted was they just had a need to buy another vehicle, and that the rest they would just like to put in the bank to have an interest income, kind of as a nest egg that has an interest income. Okay, so now that's an entirely different equation. Now, all cash turned into what you're really wanting is a vehicle and interest income. And if we've got $50,000 to work with there of sorts, how much is this vehicle that you want? And so my next question, of course, is, what vehicle do you have in mind? And they come back to say, wow, that's kind of an unusual question. He says, well, I'm thinking about some, SUV type vehicle. Really? What kind do you have in mind? Well, I'm fairly partial to Toyotas. I'm thinking of like a Toyota 4Runner. Really? Tell me about that. What color do you want? Well, I'm thinking just something simple, black, white, something simple. I'm not a real flashy person. Well, are you wanting a new one or a used one? Oh, no, definitely a used one. I don't want to pay the price of a new one. Just a really well-maintained used Toyota 4Runner that would serve our needs well. That's why we want to really sell this place, is to get some cash to do that, and then the rest just we're going to put in the bank. Well, David, I think I've got a proposal for you. And here's how the proposal went. Let's start with the price. If you were to put this property on the market for $50,000, which is what you said you wanted, and you got a full price offer tomorrow with no conditions or inspections or work orders or anything, you would pay in that area almost a 10% real estate commission. So what you would net would be more like $45,000. Is that correct? Am I hearing you say that would be where you would be? Yeah, that's about where I think we would be. Okay, so if there were no commissions or anything involved, you would take $45,000, which is the same number you would get were you to list this and sold it tomorrow for $50,000. So $45,000 with no commissions, that would work for you. Yeah, that would work great. Great. Okay, so we've solved that part of the equation. Now let's go to the next part of the equation. I have a 1-year-old white Toyota 4Runner with 28,000 original miles on it. And of course, David, you know how I take care of my stuff. It's immaculate, maintained beautifully. And I'm going to just make an assumption that if that checks out well mechanically with your mechanics, it's in perfect condition, so I know it will check out well, that would be a good down payment for the balance. So my structure would be to take $45,000. I think a fair price for my 4Runner would be around $15,000. And so that would leave a balance that I would owe you at $30,000. And rather than put that $30,000 in cash where you would put it in the bank and earn 2 or 3% interest, I would like to owe you that $30,000 and I would like to pay you 6% interest on a monthly basis. Now, assuming that the 4Runner checks out and you like it and that works well with you, which I'm certain it will, that offer looks pretty good, I would imagine. Doesn't it? And the answer was, well, yeah, I guess I had never thought really to go in those terms, but that if the 4Runner checks out and if indeed it seems that it's worth $15,000, yeah, the rest, boy, it'd probably be better to get 5 or 6% than it would 2 or 3%. So that would probably work out. I said, well, there, we've just solved it. So all we really need to do now is just meet, have you look at the car. Maybe you could line up a mechanic or whoever you might trust to take a look at it. At the same time, I could drive the vehicle. We could look that over, determine if you want the vehicle, kind of determine a fair price. And then the rest, we would just do the paperwork on this and we could have this thing wrapped up in the next week. And that's exactly how it happened. The point I'm making with that particular case study is that what started out at $50,000 all cash turned into $45,000, a $15,000 credit on a vehicle that was worth $10,000 to $12,000, Nothing out of my pocket at all. The balance on a note with $150 payments at 6% interest-only payments or more at my option, on a 30-year straight amortized loan, no cash out, no fee loan, involving the seller with financing. Very different from what they said they wanted in terms of the initial terms, but exactly what they said they wanted in terms of where the rocket ship was going. And all I did is take the initial thrust and direction of where the rocket ship was going and tap the nose slightly to get them exactly where they were going, but to where it met my terms and conditions as a real estate investor. I still have that property. That was purchased in, I would guess, 81 or 82, maybe 83. Time flies when you're having fun. And that is now one of 8 properties that I have adjacent to one another in the same location. So it's fit in nicely to a little compound, as it were, that I have up in the mountains, where I have a main home, a 5,000-foot garage that I built. This provides a small little guest home. I built a 5,000-foot barn with horses and another caretaker's house, all on 9 different pieces of property. So there's one example. I'd like to go from there and talk about another example. Last year in the Seattle area, I'm, of course, constantly sending out inquiries, letting people know in certain locations that I'm wanting to purchase their property. And this particular property was just a very modest bungalow, original home on the plateau of an area we call Queen Anne, which is very close to the downtown corridor of downtown Seattle, in a very wonderful residential neighborhood. This particular home was inherited recently by 2 sisters. And these 2 sisters lived in a very, very affluent part of Seattle, right on Lake Washington, over in an area called Bellevue. These 2 sisters inherited this home after their uncle passed away, and their uncle willed it to these 2 sisters. Now, the sisters were in their 50s, and so they now are the new owners of this house on Queen Anne, where the gentleman that has passed away had lived there for 40 years. So they make their first run over to the house to see exactly what it was that they just inherited, and they were just mortified, of course, as they walk into this house with 1940s furniture, 1940s dust, 1940s grime, and an area and a house that personally they had no interest in whatsoever. And on the counter of this particular gentleman's house, almost in anticipation of his death, he laid out a file of all the property information, and in that file was a letter from me saying that I would love to purchase this property should he ever decide to sell. Well, he passed away, but here's this file. And the 2 sisters walk in. They're in this house for less than 3 minutes. They walk in, they look at this file, they see the letter, they look around, and here's the letter that says that I will buy this home in as-is condition. I'm a very serious investor. I don't mess around. You want to sell? Let's get to it. And they call. In about 15 minutes from the phone ringing, I am meeting them at this location. So now I'm not meeting them at their home. They were at the house when they called. Best to just go straight. And there I was. But when I walk in, I immediately meet these 2 ladies, both in their 50s. Now, I'm not in their home, but I'm observing them. Forget the home for the time being. I know the situation because they told me over the phone that they just inherited this. I asked, where do they live? They told me, we live in Bellevue. We've just inherited this house in Queen Anne. Great. I understand enough of the scenario over the phone, but when I walked in and met them, here's what I saw. I saw their Dolce & Gabbana outfits, their $250 gorgeous Italian high heel shoes, the matching Gucci handbags, and the jewelry that you just wouldn't believe. And it looks like they were fresh out of the salon with their hair and makeup all done. And here they are standing in the middle of this living room, not wanting to brush up against anything in this house that was older and dirty and needed paint and needed cleaning, with the shag green carpet, with all of the older, musty stuff around. It took 5 minutes in that negotiation to get to the point, and the point was very clear. I said, ladies, I don't particularly see that you are wanting to take your brand new, beautiful nails and start going through boxes and garbage. I think that it's my impression that what I'm seeing is that you would just like to sell this home, get all cash, divide the proceeds between the two of you, and head back to the east side and live happily ever after. That all of this messy yard and all this messy stuff and the junker car in the garage and the garage that's kind of half falling down, you don't really want to deal with any of that. You just would like to get a number that you can live with and close this thing and be done with it. And they both looked at me like, well, that's probably painfully obvious, isn't it? And I said, well, of course it is. So then it was just a matter of negotiating a price. Where do we start? Well, let's look at what the tax-assessed value is of the property. Fair enough. And they pull out a tax statement out of the same file that my letter was in. And here's the tax-assessed value for 2003, is when I bought this house, of $289,000. And I said, okay, let's assume that the value is somewhere around there. And if you were to call up the local real estate company and they were to sell it, you would pay somewhere around the ballpark of $10,000 to $12,000 to sell this property, assuming you could get an offer that would take it as is with no warranties implied or expressed. So let's just cut to the chase. How about I give you $270,000, all cash, and out of that, all you would need to pay is your closing costs, which is state excise tax, title, half of escrow, and any proration of taxes. And here's about what that would be. And then I gave them a net number that represented something very close to what they could count on in escrow. Does that work with you? Their next question was the process. I said, the process is very simple. I take you ladies up the street about 4 blocks to a very nice restaurant. We sit down in a nice white linen atmosphere. You can order a glass of wine, some lunch, and while we're having lunch, I will write up the deal. Once you sign it, it's the last thing you need to think about until we go to escrow about a week later, where you will sign again and get a check. Everything else in between, I will handle. So really what's involved for you, ladies, is lunch with wine. You get out of this living room that is musty and probably messing up your Dolce & Gabbana, and signature once, escrow a week later, split this amount in half. Does that interest you? That interests us. And I said, I'll give you any amount of earnest money today that lets you know that I'm serious, and of course it will be non-refundable. And this one lady is deciding at this moment that she's going to call my bluff. She thinks, too good to be true. Okay, any amount of earnest money we want? Any amount that's even remotely reasonable, we'll be happy to do. How about $20,000? Absolutely, no problem. Okay, then let's go have that glass of wine and let's get out of here. And we left. From an hour of getting the phone call, an hour later, we are sitting at a restaurant on the plateau of Queen Anne, writing up the deal. They're drinking a glass of wine while ordering lunch. And it's done. Here's your $20,000 earnest money, non-refundable. Sign here. What I need is clear title, and we will close. And that's all there was to that. The point I'm trying to make with that little case study is simply this. Observing those two ladies in that particular situation answered the question all by itself. Sometimes you're going to entertain deals that will be a very slow, long dance. Remember the 5-hour cat story? Well, I've had deals where I have slow danced with the seller for 5 years before you finally get to the point of talking about the deal. This particular situation, it was 5 minutes, and we could put 2 and 2 together. This was the answer. Let's talk price, and let's get you out of this musty environment so that you won't have to send your beautiful clothes off to the dry cleaner. And they were very up for that proposition. And they went out and got into their beautiful Mercedes and followed me up to the restaurant. Okay, everybody's motivated by different things. Every seller is different. It's what makes this business so wonderful, by the way. I just need to interject that. It's what's kept my interest for 30 years, is that every day while you're in business, you're going to encounter different situations. As we're doing this CD today, right this minute in this recording studio, during lunch, I checked my messages and I had 2 different calls from sellers. And they are as different as night and day. And likely I will meet with both of them tomorrow. And in those meetings, let the dance begin. It may be a short dance. It may be a long dance. It may be a dance that doesn't add up to anything. But I'm not a volume sport. If I can handcraft 8, 10, 12, 15 deals a year that work well with my criterion, whereby that seller is getting everything they want, gosh, isn't that a wonderful thing? It's kept my interest all these years. Okay, let's go to another case study. A very, very different case study. This is a small multiplex. Again, a seller who has gotten a letter from me expressing sincere interest in buying their property. They're getting letters from me, of course, and this is a recap of our Wisdom for Wealth and Foundations for Freedom content. They're getting a letter from me based on the location and what they have in that location. So here they've received a letter. Now, this is a gal that's owned this property for 20 years, meticulously maintained this sixplex with her husband for 20 years. Over the course of that 20 years, they've paid off the property completely, so it's free and clear. It's a classic 1926 sixplex, gorgeous, gorgeous building, perfectly maintained in a very desirable area of Seattle. Well, in the same year-and-a-half period, this wonderful lady retires and her husband passes away at a very young age. Matter of fact, he passed away when he was 50. And at the age of 50, this particular lady retired as well. Well, now the management and maintenance of this building, her handyman is no longer there. And so it's on her to keep this building up, to keep it rented, to keep everything going, and it was a little overwhelming. And so she responded to a letter I sent her, and understand now that as I'm meeting this wonderful lady in her own home, not at the building, in her own home, these are the things I observed. First of all, incredibly honest, hardworking, salt-of-the-earth lady. You just would have to meet her to just appreciate this. Her home, simple, modest, meticulous. The yard, perfect. The interior, nothing fancy at all, but clean and neat and tidy and organized. And her idea was simply to sell this building, to remove herself of the responsibilities, and to just basically live happily ever after in her little house in this area of Seattle. But this was not a highly educated person. And so as we began talking about her life and her needs and what it was that she was trying to achieve, issues of recapture of depreciation, that was a foreign concept to her. Issues of capital gains tax, that was also a foreign concept to her. These sorts of issues, when they were put on the table and explained, all of a sudden painted a very different picture about her idea to sell this building and get all cash for it. Because essentially she had no basis left in this building. From what she paid, when you recapture the depreciation she's already taken, every bit of the sales price would become gain on this particular property. And this is a property that the value is approximately $750,000. Well, this would be a huge amount of tax that she would pay to the government if she received all cash. And so what the situation evolved into was a discussion of what is the real objective for selling this building, which is income stream. Without any of the management responsibilities, without any of the maintenance responsibilities, without any responsibilities, what she really wanted wasn't a pile of cash because there was no need for cash. Her home was free and clear. She had a little retirement income. What she really wanted was just income stream. And once again, I was able to very gently tap the nose of the spacecraft and take it from an all-cash scenario to a down payment and the balance on a promissory note secured by a deed of trust on the subject property offer. Now, this wasn't without a lot of slow dancing. Part of the slow dancing that happened in the several meetings was an entire day where I picked her up in the morning. I took her to meet my attorney and ask any questions she may want to ask on me. I will pay. If we want to be here for 2 hours, I will pay the bill. But ask him any questions you may have around estate tax, around capital gains tax, around anything you want to ask him about. It's on me. Then we went to my accountant. Same thing applied there. Then we met with my banker, just to be able to give a reference to who are the people that I deal with. Then we went to the escrow person that I deal with on a daily basis and had this particular seller meet escrow so that she could ask questions around escrow. How does that work? And it's been a long time since she's done anything in real estate. Then we went to my insurance agent to talk about insurance of the building, and if I was involved with her in the financing, how she is protected by an insurance policy and actually named as a loss payee so that if the building burnt down, she would be protected by this insurance policy. We went to all these people, all these team members I have in one day. I think that what she got out of that, as much as the answers to a whole bunch of questions, what she really got out of that was seeing how I interacted and what kind of relationship I had with all of the people that I deal with in my business on a daily basis. And therefore, she was able to sort of transpose herself to say, all the relationships he has with the people he does business with is on this level. And if he did business with me, I would be on this level. Do you see the nth meme there? You Aristotelians? Greg has this kind of relationship with the people he's in business with. Greg does this business with this person and this person and this person. And it's no far stretch to introduce her own name into that equation and come to the same conclusion that this is how I do business with everybody. I think that there was as much value in that part of the equation as there was in the actual answer she got to the questions that she needed. And so shortly after that tour day, we were able to sit down, and instead of a $750,000 all-cash deal, that deal changed to $750,000, $150 down, $600,000 on a note at 6% interest, 30-year amortized loan, 20-year cash out, interest-only payments or more at my option, secured by a first deed of trust on the subject property. Once again, it got her to the conclusion she had in mind, but in a more intelligent way. Do you remember the idea that knowledge defers to higher knowledge? So as a negotiator, once I've listened to her and once I've understood the major objectives, at an appropriate time and place, I can interject and tap the nose of that spacecraft slightly and discuss the issues of recapture of depreciation, discuss the issues of capital gains, and discuss the way that we can get this spacecraft to its destination, but in a slightly different way that certainly lines up with the objectives that this person has in selling this building. There's another example of a subtle yet effective case study that led to some good negotiation. Now, I could sit here in the studio for about 12 days and go through case study after case study after case study in real estate. And every single one, the deal is handcrafted after I have a working knowledge of the seller, who they are, their attitudes, their goals, their beliefs, and where it is that they're trying to go. But I want you to understand that this doesn't only apply to real estate. That negotiation is understanding and being aware of all factors. And so I want to tell you kind of a humorous story that happened just this last weekend that has nothing to do with real estate, but whereby I was brought in to do some negotiation. And in that arena, which had nothing to do with real estate, I'm simply putting the puzzle pieces together to solve a situation. Now, this is a funny story, but I'm actually golfing down at Pebble Beach. And I golfed Pebble Beach on Saturday, and I golfed a course called Spanish Bay on Sunday. So I'm actually at Spanish Bay, and I, being a single, am joined with 3 gentlemen who are from Korea. And these 3 gentlemen cannot speak a word of English. I shouldn't say a word. They could speak a word or two, but very, very little English. And so we played this round of golf, and the funny part of the story is that at the end of 9 holes, because they were not very good golfers, I was sort of falling asleep. And so in my very broken way, I suggested that we had some sort of game going on to keep me interested in the game. And boy, their ears perked up. They knew the whole idea that sometimes golf involves betting. And so I negotiated that I would give them all 1 stroke a hole and that we would play for $10 a hole. Now, that's not a big bet, but it at least is enough to keep you interested. And so, their 4 was equal to my 3. Their 5 was equal to my 4. And so let the games begin. Well, they were terrible golfers, and it didn't take much to beat all of them all 9 holes each. Well, that simply means I won $10 a hole for the last 9 holes from all of them. That's $270 if you can do the math. Now, it's not a huge payday in golf, but it's better than nothing. And so at the end of this, they gladly and willfully paid their $270 and thanked me in their own very broken way for the friendly competition. And so I was paid, and I was just getting my bag off of the cart and ready to go on. And this particular threesome was hustling because they had a tee time right after we finished at Spanish Bay to go over to Pebble Beach, and the same threesome was going to play Pebble Beach in the afternoon. So we finished at 1:30 at Spanish Bay. They were going to head to Pebble Beach and tee up at 3 o'clock to play the afternoon round over at Pebble Beach. Sounds great. As the cart people came, they started taking their clubs off of the cart, and these were rental clubs at Spanish Bay. They actually rented the clubs at Spanish Bay, and they were throwing huge objections that they didn't want the person to take the clubs. They wanted to take these clubs over to Pebble Beach and use the same rental clubs, which they really all liked, over at Pebble Beach. Because then the next day, on Monday, they would be back playing Spanish Bay again, and then they thought they would just bring them back to Spanish Bay and all would be well. Play Spanish Bay, and then at the end of that round, turn the clubs in. Well, the cart person told them in no uncertain terms that wouldn't work, that Spanish Bay clubs had to stay at Spanish Bay, and that they could rent other clubs over at Pebble Beach that will also be nice clubs, and that they would work just fine, but they would have to rent the clubs over there. Well, these Korean gentlemen didn't like that idea at all. They liked these clubs, they wanted to use these clubs, and they were in their best way trying to communicate this frustration, but they had very little ability in English to do that. But I could tell that they were visibly upset, and they just paid me $270, which was like stealing candy from a baby. And so I felt somewhat obligated to step in and see if I couldn't help them. So I simply asked the guy I was in the cart with, his name was Carl, I said, "Carl, may I take over and try to help you in this situation?" And so I said, "I would like to speak with the pro, please," to the cart boy. And he went and got the pro, and the pro came out. And I said, "Okay, I'm understanding that normally you like to leave Spanish Bay clubs here and that they could get Pebble Beach clubs over there. And I totally understand that that's what normally happens." I said, "But I would like you to consider another way of doing this. And because I can tell that you are a highly intelligent young man, or you would not be a pro at Spanish Bay, and that you've got a big business perspective because you also wouldn't be in this position unless you had that perspective, I would like to at least put an opportunity in front of you that I think would solve this situation in a good way. But I'd like to tee that up with a couple observations. First of all, these 3 gentlemen right here have just paid $225 each to play this golf course. They're not in a package deal. They're not part of a big group. And this is your bread and butter, as you know, when people pay full fare to play your golf course. So they're good paying clients. Second of all, while on the golf course, they must have spent at least $100 on the food cart going by. Also, about a 90% profit margin for this particular institution. Once again, they've been good clients. Thirdly, as you'll notice, every single one of them are wearing about $300 worth of apparel each that they purchased out of your pro shop at about a 60% profit margin to you. Once again, this is your business, and I don't need to tell you your business because you're seeing where I'm going with this. You have a shuttle service because Spanish Bay, Spyglass, Pebble Beach, and Poppy Hills are all owned by the same company. You have a shuttle service that could load them up, these 3 sets of clubs, which they want just because they want to use them. You can charge them for these clubs again. This isn't the issue. They've got money. They're willing to pay. Then they're going to go over to Pebble Beach and pay $400 each to play that course. Likely they'll spend another $400 or $500 each at that pro shop. And likely they'll spend another $100 each on the cart that drives around serving them martinis and vodka tonics. Then you're going to put them right back on the shuttle and bring them right back here to Spanish Bay because they're staying here at Spanish Bay. Therefore, your clubs have just returned. But your clubs have returned with about a $4,000 profit margin attached to them versus if you piss them off, they're going to leave. And they're not going to play Pebble Beach. And they're going to go to their homeland and tell every CEO in Korea, don't come here. Now, I'm certain that you're able to make the intelligent decision or you would not be in this place. So what is it? Are you going to take their $4,000 or $5,000 and have a happy customer? Or are you going to send them away pissed off and receive nothing? And of course, this very young pro said, I think I see your point here. And here came the shuttle, loaded them up with their golf clubs, and off to Pebble Beach. Part of negotiation, and it happens everywhere and every place in our life, is raising people to a level of your desired competence. What I mean by that is telling someone that they're an idiot for not getting it is not going to get you the end result. Telling somebody that they're incredibly smart and that they wouldn't be here unless they were able to make these very challenging decisions, but here's why I think you probably are going to go this way, that's going to get a desired end. It's the scenario of honey attracts more bees than a swatter. It's 2 different ways of getting the same end. And in this situation, and in many situations like that, raising the level of your expectation and telling people that you know that they are the type of people who are going to achieve this level of performance is a much better way of going at it than saying, I'm looking at you going, I don't believe you're even thinking this. You're an idiot and let me tell you why. That's not going to achieve the desired end. Be it a case study that revolves around real estate acquisition and finance, or be it our day in and day out living and life, we are negotiating 24/7. Negotiation is about listening. Negotiation is about understanding objectives of all parties. Negotiation is about planting seeds and steering the ship in a subtle way, not necessarily not a direct way. Direct can be subtle, so that all parties are achieving their ultimate desired end. That's what negotiation is about. It's about relationships. Relationships that hopefully will stand the test of time.
This is the end of Disc 3. Negotiations That Pay with Greg Pinio continues on Disc 4.